Your future self is a different person than you. They know more than you do. They would do things differently than you would. Just like you're a different person than your former self. You're not the same person you were 3 years ago. You're not even the same person as you were 3 months ago. You know things your former self didn't know, and your future self knows things you don't know. So here's 5 simple ways to become your future self right now. First off, you have to actually decide who you want your future self to be. According to research in psychology, a concept called prospection, your view of your future is the thing that drives your present behaviors and attitudes. So if you have a clear view of your future, and if you have a compelling and an exciting view of your future, then your present is going to be really great. There's a quote from Dan Sullivan. He said, "The only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger." So if you want to have a better present, then you have to have a better future. The bigger your future, the more bold your present will be. Your goal shapes your process. In philosophy, they call that teleology. Everything you do is driven by a purpose. And so the more specific you get about who you want your future self to be, the more you can then go and be that person now. Number two is that you actually have to be your future self. Once you've defined your future self, you actually have to start being your future self now. You can't just work your way up there. You actually have to start being that person now. You've got to say, what would my future self do? Zig Ziglar had a concept, and it's a powerful concept all throughout psychology and self-development. It's called be, then do, then have. You have to actually be your future self now and do what they would do, not do what you would do, because your future self is different than you. Your future self would actually do differently than current you because your future self is not the same as you. One thing that's beautiful about this is that it allows you to not be so attached to your current identity. Your current self is very temporary. What Carol Dweck, the Stanford psychologist, has found is that people with a fixed mindset, they're very committed to their current self. They're very committed to their current identity. They're very committed to their current skills. And they think that their future self is going to be the same person as who they are today. That's what a fixed mindset is this is who I am now, and this is who I'm always going to be. And that's actually exactly what Daniel Gilbert at Harvard found. He found that most people, when they think about who their future self is, even 10 years into the future, they view their future self as, frankly, the exact same person as they are today. They have zero imagination. What Albert Einstein said is imagination is more important than knowledge. So the first thing you want to do is actually, going back to number one, decide who you want your future self to be, but also 10x your vision of who you want them to be. You want your future self to be fundamentally different from who you are today. As Albert Einstein said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Step number two, be that person now. Ask yourself, what would my future self do right now? And literally delete all of the things that your current self would do and start being your future self now. When you start being your future self now and start living as your future self, as if all that you want is already yours. Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Florence Shinn said, faith knows it has already received and acts accordingly. So you've got to be your future self, feel your future self. If you ever study any of the Olympians, all of them visualize their future self. Michael Phelps, there's a lot said about his visualization practices. Every night he would watch himself swimming. He would watch from multiple angles. He'd watch as if he was like the cameraman. He'd watch if he was the swimmer next to him. He'd watch from his own view. He'd watch from someone from the stands. He'd watch from someone on TV. You can watch from multiple views. And ultimately, you want to not only see it, but you want to train your brain to believe it's real. Assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Be your future self now. Do what your future self would do, not what you would do. And be more flexible with your current self. Don't worry so much about who your current self is. Daniel Gilbert said, human beings are works in progress that mistakenly think they're finished. Don't think you're finished. You're not finished. Your current self is very temporary. There's a great quote from Alain de Botton. He said, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. Well, the same is true of your future self. In 12 months from now, you better transform so much that your future self is actually a little embarrassed by where you're at today. Now, you don't need to be embarrassed. You can actually just be grateful for how much you've transformed, but you should be able to see fundamental differences between your current self and your former self. And you then want to take big action towards your future self. Step three is to actually start telling people who your future self is. This is where the rubber meets the road. And a lot of people, they say you shouldn't share your goals, but that's ridiculous because all of the research in psychology on identity shows that your identity is not only how you view yourself and how you define yourself, but it's also how you describe yourself. It's how you narrate yourself. And most people's identity is fundamentally based on the past and on the present. But if you want to really become your future self, you want to actually start telling people about your future self. One of my favorite stories on this subject is actually Mr. Beast. Mr. Beast is one of the fastest growing YouTubers in the world. 5 years ago, when he was a 17-year-old kid, one night in rural North Carolina, he was a 17-year-old kid, and he was supposed to be studying for his history class, his history test. And what he did instead was he filmed a video of himself looking at the camera, and he wasn't talking to his audience like I'm talking to you. he was actually talking to his future self. And he called the video Hi Me in 5 years, and he set the video to be published 5 years into the future. Last year, actually, that video got published. You can find it on his YouTube channel. It's called Hi Me in 5 years. But he was talking to his future self, and he was doing it very publicly. He pushed publish on it. He wasn't afraid of his future self. And so if you're going to become your desired future self, whatever that looks like, if you're going to become an author, if you're going to become a business person, if you're going to become a runner, whatever you want to do, if you're going to actually become that person, then you've got to, it's going to be public at some point anyways. And so why don't you just start telling people about it? Because once you start telling people about it, not only will other people start to see it and believe it, but you'll start to see it and believe it. And there's a lot of research as well from Dr. Robert Cialdini. He wrote the amazing book called Influence. And what he talked about is a concept called the principle of consistency, that human beings have a need to be consistent. We have a need for our words, our actions, and our identity to be aligned. And so when you start telling someone what you're going to do and who you want to be, you'll have an intense internal pressure to actually fulfill that for your own internal need to be consistent. And so when you start telling people what you're going to do and start making public commitments, and maybe even start making public investments in your future self, then you will actually start getting there faster. And your behavior will actually start to be driven by your desired future self rather than your behavior being driven by your past self, which is how most people are, because most people's identity is in their past. And whatever view you have of yourself, that's the thing that drives your behavior. Your behavior is driven by your identity. And so you can't try to will your way to change. You have to actually be your way to change. You have to be your future self now. You have to be your future self first. Now, the fourth one is to start investing money into your future self. You want to invest at the level of your future self. So you want to tell the story at the level of your future self, which means your identity is at the level of your future self. That's number 3. But number 4 is you want to start investing money at the level of your future self. When I was doing my PhD program in psychology at Clemson University, one of my studies, this was actually my master's thesis, I studied what's the difference between real entrepreneurs and wannabe entrepreneurs. And I just wanted to know what's the difference. And specifically, I had a question. It was called, did you ever have a point of no return experience? I was thinking like there was a point of no return where there was just no way you could go back. And really, that's the identity shift. That's when you start being your future self. And what all of the wannabe entrepreneurs said was this. They said, no, I've never had that. But a lot of them said, I would love to have that experience one day. Well, all of the actual entrepreneurs, people who are really running companies, said, yes, I've had a point of no return experience. I've had many. And most of them, that point of no return experience was when they started investing literally money into their goals, into mentorships, into their product design, for me, my point of no return was I actually started investing money to get a website when I wanted to be a writer. I invested money into online courses. I actually started to go through the process of deliberate practice. Deliberate practice means you're actually practicing at the level of your future self. You're actually working towards becoming your future self. You're getting feedback. You're actually learning. You're studying the craft. You're getting better. You're trying to be better prolific than perfect. You're actually working and failing and operating at the level of your future self. So if you start investing money, you will become committed. There's a lot of research on this in behavioral economics. A lot of research, for example, on the subject of sunk cost bias. A lot of research that shows that when people invest even small amounts of money in something, they feel compelled and committed to going through with it. It's like if you buy a movie ticket for $10, you get like a third into the movie and you don't like it, but you finish just because you paid the $10. It's funny how people make emotional decisions based on finances. And so if you start investing money into your future self, you will become more committed to your future self. And commitment is key. Your results are based on your commitment. So there's a book called The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership. What they say in that book is that you can know your commitment based on the results you're getting. So whatever results you're getting, that's what you're committed to. Whatever you weigh right now, that's what you're committed to. Whatever money you're making right now, that's what you're committed to. Your commitment isn't what you want. Your commitment is who you are. There's even a great book on this subject called As a Man Thinketh by James Allen. And he said, we attract in our life not what we want, but who we are. So whatever you're committed to is what results you're getting. And whatever you're committed to is who you're being. That's why you need to be your future self now. Whoever you want to be, you got to start being that person now and start doing what that person would do. Start doing it at that level. Start investing at that level. Start taking bold risks at that level. And so when you start investing, just like you'd invest in anything else, if you start investing money in the stock market, and you invest wisely, your future grows. And as your future grows, guess what happens to your present? As your future grows, your present gets better. Again, back to the Dan Sullivan statement. The only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. And also back to prospection. Whatever view you hold of your own future is the primary driver of who you are in the present. So as you start making investments in your future self will get bigger because you'll not only get more committed and you'll be taking more action, which means you'll start being at a higher level, but you'll start actually making results, which will build your confidence, because confidence is actually the byproduct of actually getting results. So as you commit at a higher level and as you start being at a higher level, you're actually going to start creating results at a higher level. And those results are going to build your confidence. And confidence then becomes the springboard for bigger imagination towards a bigger future self. And so as you start building confidence, because you're being at a higher level and doing at a higher level and creating at a higher level, your confidence is just going to keep growing, which is going to compel your future self to get bigger and bigger. And as your future self gets bigger and bigger, your present gets better. And you start being driven more and more by your future self. So you've got to invest. And the more you invest, the bigger your future self will be. The more you invest, the more you'll transform. Investing literally upgrades you at the subconscious level. We all have a baseline. Whatever baseline you have, your future self's baseline is up here. They have their own normal. They have their own set of expectations. They have their own autopilot. As you start investing at the level of your future self, you're literally shattering your old way of doing things and you're resetting your sense of normal. It's a subconscious enhancing behavior. It's the most powerful way to go. You want to just keep investing at the level of your future self, planting seeds at the level of your future self, learning at the level of your future self, failing at the level of your future self. Now the final one is a concept called measure the gain, not the gap. So as you're making progress towards your future self, and this is a book, by the way, that me and Dan Sullivan wrote. It's an original concept from Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach. And really what the gap and the gain is all about is as you're making progress, you're going to do, if you're committing and taking action towards your future self, you're going to make progress. And the thing you really need to do along the way is measure your own gains. Because as you make progress, you're going to be in the gap if you're measuring yourself against your ideals. As you're making progress forward, your ideals are going to keep expanding. And if you're always measuring yourself against where you should be or against what other people are doing, then you're always going to feel like you're behind the eight ball. You're always behind. But if instead you just measure your own progress, which means that the only person you measure yourself against is your former self. Ernest Hemingway said, "True nobility is not about being better than your fellow man. True nobility is about being superior to your former self." So when you're in the game, all you do is you measure yourself against yourself. I'm not competing against you. I'm not competing against anyone. I don't really care about anyone else. I'm not measuring myself against anyone else. The only person I'm measuring myself against is my former self, who I was yesterday, who I was last week, who I was last year. And I can see my gains. And because I'm measuring my gains, I can feel progress. And I can see that I'm not the same person I was last year. I can see that I'm embarrassed by my former self. Not really embarrassed. I'm actually proud of my former self. But I can see massive difference between my current self and my former self. So those are the 5 keys to becoming your desired future self. My name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. Down below, you can get access to my free 30-day Future Self course. Also, this video was made and edited by DrawShop. And so down below, you can learn more about DrawShop and their amazing video editing. Have a good day.